What's up everyone, welcome back to another Avid Basics video. In this one we're going to take a look at keyboard shortcuts, a topic that should be a nice and quick video, but long-time viewers of the channel will know that I'm not exactly great at those. But what we'll cover is why keyboard shortcuts in Avid are so essential, how to make them, and a number of my favorite ones, including some that, even long-time Avid users might not be quite as familiar with, but really helpful, definitely recommend. So let's get started. Right, so first things first, why are, keyboard shortcuts in Avid so important? Well, unlike some of its competitors, Avid was designed a long time ago in the 80s, and it was designed at a time when the primary way of editing was using Moviolas or Steenbecks, big machines that were very tactile for splicing physical film together and building an edit that way. Like I say, it was much more tactile and textured. You're using your hands a lot more, and there'd be switches and dials and things. And that did continue as we moved into nonlinear digital editing, even all the way up to today. If you look at a Blackmagic designed keyboard for Resolve, for example, you'll see the big dial on it as well, for jogging along your timeline, for trimming and things. There's the Resolve panels. Avid's got its own set of hardware like that. Editing historically, by its nature, is a very hands-on activity. You're sculpting the film. And if we embrace that philosophy in our non-linear editing tools and use keys and push buttons and dials a lot more than, say, a mouse and clicks on the user interface, it's just going to be a lot more efficient. It's going to be a lot more responsive. And, editing is a lot about cutting with the rhythm, and it's about feeling. And I wholeheartedly believe that can be done a whole lot better on a keyboard and with peripherals as well, dials, switches, whatever. But we're going to focus on the keyboard for today. So that's why I believe keyboard shortcuts are so important. When I'm initially teaching Avid to people who are mostly coming from Premiere or even Resolve, that they're coming from, other user interfaces where they've maybe been self-taught, the very first thing that I always want to hone in on is to map a custom keyboard with all of the tools that you like to use a lot and practice with them, develop a muscle memory. Avid is definitely a much more friendly UI, and it'll be a lot more cooperative if you embrace that philosophy of using keyboard shortcuts. Well, now that we've established just how important I believe keyboard shortcuts to be, how do we make them in Avid? Well, there's two primary ways. And both of them require us going into our settings and opening up a virtual keyboard. So I'm going to bring up my settings here. This can be accessed from the File menu and going to Settings, or you can see the keyboard shortcut there of Shift Command equals sign. This will be Shift Control equals on Windows, or actually there's another much faster keyboard shortcut on a Mac, which is just Command comma. That's sort of the way you open settings on all applications on a Mac. So we bring that up, go to the User tab, and then we're looking for K for keyboard. So you can just hit the K key to jump down to K, and you'll see all of your keyboards. Now I have two custom ones built here that I flick between. Generally, when you first fire up your Avid, it'll probably be one of these that will initially be ticked. The one that has the tick to the left of it is the one that is currently active. So if you only are ever going to have one keyboard, you think, then just double click on that one and you can get to work customizing it. I myself have this edit one, so I'm going to double click that, and this is my edit keyboard. So this is a virtual representation of your keyboard with all of the shortcuts in place. And if you hover over any of these keys, it'll tell you, what is the function that you've mapped to that specific key. And if you hold the Shift key, the Shift modifier, then you'll see this all changes to reflect all the shortcuts you've put on Shift plus any given key. But of course, this is just showing us the keys that we've already got on the keyboard. How do we put new functions on there? Well, we're going to need something called the command palette, which you can get from the Tools menu. It is down here. Or of course, there is also a keyboard shortcut to bring this up, which is Command 3 or Control 3 if you're on Windows. And that pops up there. This is the command palette. Now in the command palette here, there is a whole heap of functions separated into a bunch of different categories in tabs along the top. And these can simply be dragged and dropped onto any key on our virtual keyboard to map them. This is what Avid calls button-to-button reassignment. So any of these functions that you see here, most of the most common ones are here, and you'll be able to sort through them. If you don't know which tab one is in, you can search here for, say, splice, and splice in is there. Depending on what version of Avid you're currently using, you might not have this search bar. It was added relatively recently. I'll have the version number of Media Composer where that was introduced on the screen at the moment because I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was a relatively recent addition. Right, now before I get to the juicy bit of showing you some unique and useful keystrokes and shortcuts that you can use, I did say that there was two main ways of mapping keys, and it is the other one, which you'll find over here, called menu to button reassignment, which unlocks a lot of the less commonly mapped functions. So how this one works is if we find a key, what's a key I don't particularly care about, I'll say Shift Z, then we can go into any menu within Avid, so any of these menus up here, even these little fast menus here, and as well the little fast menus in the bin. And if I click on any of these functions, then that function will be mapped to the selected key that I had on the keyboard. So I'll select that key again. I'll come down here and I'll say I want that to bring up the track control panel. So that's me done that now. And now if I do Shift Z, you can see the track control panel on my timeline appears and disappears. Very, very useful, actually. Not something I've actually in the past thought about mapping, but I think I'm actually going to leave that there. That's quite nice, since that allows me per track controls for adding waveforms, track-wide effects, and, you know, clip gain mode, a bunch of different track-specific effects. So there you go. There's our two main ways to add keyboard shortcuts within Avid. Now, while I am about to show you a number of different keyboard shortcuts here, I could be talking for hours and hours and not be able to list all of these. So I do recommend that you explore the command palette, you explore the different functions in the menus, and decide what is most useful for you as an editor when you're cutting. What do you like to have at hand, you know, to employ very quickly most of the time without having to move our mouse around to a different part of the UI and, you know, map them to your keyboard. It is definitely worth exploring. Every editor that I have ever come across using Avid has had some variation of a custom keyboard, most of them quite extensively customized, and it will make your experience of using Avid much, much nicer. Hey everybody, Jack from the future here, editing the video together. Now, as usual with me being me, I went on and on and on a bit with the next portion of this video where I was listing different suggestions of keyboard shortcuts, or rather Avid functions that you could map to keyboard shortcuts that would be in your best interest. Now initially I had just planned to list ones that were sort of less common, maybe not quite as often mapped or often used. But then I started to add in ones that I thought would be really good for people coming from other NLEs that would be good for them to know. You know, like you know, adding edits in Avid versus using the Razor tool in Premiere or the Blade tool in Final Cut, for example, and where all of these different functions are, and you know how you can map them. And the initial recording went on for about an hour and a half. I listed all of these functions, and it was just way too long. So what I'm going to do is I've cut it down to just 5 of the functions that I recommended, 5 that are maybe not as often talked about in Avid, but are really good functions and ones I would recommend you doing. And if you want to see that full video where I go on and list a whole bunch of different functions that you can, you know, map in your Avid and might be really good for your editing workflows, then that full, much longer video is currently available for YouTube and Patreon subscribers. So you can check it out there if you really want to see that. Otherwise, let's get on with the video and we'll go through those top 5. Right, now moving over into the effects and 3D tabs. Now, I'm not going to talk about all of these tools or any real specific ones here. I just want to draw attention to these tabs and encourage people playing about with their Avid to explore them, because it's not something I see a lot of Avid editors using. And say if I wanted to play around with the sizing of this clip, right? So I'm going to put a 3D warp on there, and then I'll open it up in Effect Editor. Rather than say if I wanted to crop the top a bit, for example, rather than going to crop and then sliding the slider for top, right? Isn't it much easier to hit the button for crop, which then activates these controls, and then I can just crop it to exactly what I like in the canvas. Probably more similar to what you would do in other NLEs or in, you know, visual effects apps. You know, like I said, we're getting back to more tactile, you know, buttons directly for things rather than sliders and information. So all of these keys right here, you know, in terms of moving around the X and Y position, scaling we can also do. So I'll change this to scale, which allows me to click and drag, but also, you know, scale like that. There's reduce and enlarge, which is Avid's way of saying zoom in and out, but differentiating from zooming in and out on the timeline. It's just zooming in and out on the picture for viewing purposes while you're working. They call it reduce and enlarge. It's in the effects tab. So if I zoom in and out, then I can easily make this really tiny, and that's my viewer, that's my frame. Or I can make it really big. I can, you know, position her within the frame. So I definitely recommend that when you're doing your effects work within Avid, to play around with those keystrokes and those tools, because it can just make a lot of things a lot easier and save you a lot of time. And I will admit as well, that is the reason that under my keyboards, I have a separate keyboard for effects, because I wanted to map all of those effects keys and I ran out of room on my keyboard. So I switched to this effects keyboard whenever I'm doing effects work. Now, another thing here that is actually a bit of a pain point for a lot of people moving to Avid from other NLEs is the trim and segment tools. So your segment is your tool to select clips, and the trim tool, self-explanatory, is the trim tool for making trims. Now we have two variations of both the segment and the trim tools. The red one being for overwrite, which is a bit more destructive. This is to select and hit delete. This is going to delete and leave a space there. Also, if I was to edit out using the red trim tool, then we have the same result. It is just removing stuff and leaving a filler gap in its place. Whereas if we were to use the yellow trim tool, it is trying to maintain sync, and you can see it's pulling the entirety of the timeline along with it. And this is because our sync locks are on, which are over on the left next to our tracks here. I've got it on all tracks just now. And so your yellow trims and yellow segments are going to try to respect that sync lock. Now, the issue here that a lot of people have is the Smart Tools function of dynamically changing between these tools. If I hover over the top of a clip, it is the red version. If I hover over the bottom, it is the yellow segment, and the same thing would apply over a cut point. If I hover over the top, it would be red. Over the bottom, it would be yellow. Now, this sort of dynamically changing as it hovers can be a bit finicky, especially if your tracks are getting quite, you know, thin and small. I mean, the default size for video tracks already is a bit small. And so my solution to this is two toggle keys, which I have mapped to F9 and F10. And so you can see here, currently with my segment mode, it has both tools enabled. But if I hit my key, it toggles between none, red, yellow, and both. And so I can just toggle between them by hitting that key to get the one that I actually want for any given moment. And that way I'm not accidentally using the wrong one by hovering over the wrong portion of the timeline, and I can be a bit more precise. But it's also very quick and easy for me to quickly toggle between them. And the same thing goes for trim. So that's one that I can definitely recommend having to the timeline. It's one that I've always liked having there. It can be found in the Smart Tools tab of the command palette, right here. Segment mode toggle, trim type toggle. Right now, next up, you may have noticed just before I was dynamically switching the timeline view to show different track sizes, which was in order to give us a bigger video tracks for demonstrating the Smart Tools. We can customize the layout up here by selecting the relevant tracks. And say if I want my video tracks to be even bigger, I can go big, 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 big. Say if I only wanted V1 and 2 big, because I want it to be for finessing cut points, you just select the tracks that you want to change, and Command K, obviously Control K on Windows, will make it smaller, and Command L will make it larger. And then once you have this set up the way that you like it for a specific task, you can then come down here, click the drop-down menu and hit Save As, and then you can type in a name for the template. So I'm going to say, you know, V1, 2, focus. And then you'll be able to call that up whenever you need. And this is a function I really like, especially for dealing with effects work or transitions or cut points or moving around some video. And of course, we can map these different views to keys. So while you're in the command palette, I believe it's under the More tab. Yep, here it is. We have TV1 through to TV8. So TV is timeline view. So I can set timeline 1 to be video, timeline 2 to be audio, and timeline 3 to be V1/2 focus, and 4 to be default. Oh, please note, by the way, that if you're ever making custom timeline views, default isn't an option by default. So before you make a custom one, just hit Save As on whatever's there, or you know, by default, and just save it as default so you can revert back to it when needed. I do find that to be a bit of a strange behavior, but it is what it is. But yes, for sound editors who may want to just make the timeline all sound really large for them to work with, or for you know, doing effects work, this can be a really useful function to be able to toggle and switch your view around between, which is definitely something I would recommend doing. Next up in the command palette, we've got tracks. Now, most people in Avid, I say, do use tracks to a certain degree to say activate and deactivate tracks. But what you can actually do is you can also use this to monitor tracks. Say I have my timeline and I keep jumping down to do some effects work, and my monitor, which is this bit here, keeps jumping down because I have auto monitoring turned on, which is on by default. But I want to keep my monitor up to the top track, say. Or say I'm about to do an export and I need my monitor to be monitoring everything because I want everything to be included in the export. Well, then you could have, you know, if you're always going to have, say, 8 tracks on your timeline, like are here, what you could do, I don't see enough people doing this, is you could map V8 to your keyboard, right? And then under Other, add Option key to it after you've done it. Now you'll see it's a bit too small for me to see here, but it's added a little dot to it. And this basically just means that when I hit that key, it's essentially going to hold Option and do the key. It's going to add the Option modifier. And if you add the Option modifier, then what it's going to do is it's going to monitor that track. So it's not going to enable it or select it, it's going to monitor it. So this is a really useful way in Avid to just monitor the top one if you're just always going to have a set amount of tracks, especially right before doing an export. So I'll maybe say always have my mask or like a watermark, maybe just always sitting on the top. And then I'll have 2 buttons to toggle, say V7 and V8, and then I can just always monitor or, you know, right above or below the watermark for when I'm working versus when I'm exporting. Definitely a workflow I would recommend. And if you're someone who really likes macros like me, it allows you to build in some fun, nifty script macros for exports. Now we can also nest clips, or what Avid calls collapse. So I've got a comp here to insert some video into this screen. You can see if I select the bottom layer, this is what the original comp looks like. I'll put this back to a single monitor so you can see. And then that layer and that. And then this layer is just sort of put on the top. And that layer is trimmed back and tidied up a bit. Now, if I didn't want this to take up 3 layers of tracks, I can select all of these and use the collapse function to nest them all together there. Nice and tidy. Now, one thing to be aware of is that you can't It's not quite as easy to undo nesting in Avid. You can do it, of course, by double clicking and then selecting the clips and just dragging them out. That is kind of the best way to undo a nest in Avid, or a simple undo as well if you've just done it by accident. But for editing the contents within a nest rather than undoing it, the sort of approved workflow is, you collapse the parts of the comp, and then I think it's in the effects tab actually, we have step in, which allows us to enter into that nest and just edit the contents, edit what's inside, and then we have step out to come back out a layer. So it would remain on the timeline like that. Now, as a long-time assistant editor and editor, I wouldn't recommend doing this too much. Or if you do, I would do it on top and leave a copy of the base layer on V1. So say I would put my nest there with all my comp, and then I would leave a copy of this here. And I've just held the Option or Alt key while I clicked and dragged that there to make a copy. And this is for doing turnovers later on, so that you'll be able to much easier read source timecode and source name from that one track, rather than it getting confused and saying multiple clips there, and it will pick one and read it. So I would always like to keep V1 with, your base plate layer. And like we were saying at the start, having a highly customized Avid keyboard based on how you work and the type of tools that you like to use is really essential, I think, to getting the most out of Avid. I think without it, you're not necessarily going to have a great time within Avid. So yeah, I definitely highly recommend trying out some of these ones I've shown you. Explore the command palette, explore the menus, find the functions you like, and map them to a keyboard. So yeah, let me know how you get on. If your favorite functions weren't shown here, then by all means, feel free to tell me about it in the comments. If there's one that you think I might not know about, or one that you think I should know about, please, by all means, tell me in the comments. I would love to learn about it. And yeah, that covers us for keyboard shortcuts and within Avid. Thank you, as always, to Patreon and YouTube members for subscribing with your hard-earned cash. That is greatly appreciated, especially this year. And yeah, I will see you all in the next video. If you've got any ideas for what that should be, please hit me up. As you can tell, with the lack of videos this year, I'm kind of running out of ideas. So please just fire them all at me and I will get to them as soon as I have time. But until then, see ya.